Hello and welcome to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We will, as always, start with a story.
I'm nobody, stripped bare down to my last molecule. I am not my mistakes, my sorrows, my fears, my weaknesses. I am not my trials, my comparisons, my tribulations, my limitations. I am not what other people think or say. Then what am I? I am the space in which my stories show up. I am the shaper and the shifter. I am the dealer and the healer. I am the dreamer and the doer. I am the winner and the loser. I am the leader and the follower. I am the comer and the goer. I am the inner and the outer. I am the fixer and the failure. I am the creator and the destroyer. So, who am I? I'm nobody because I can be anybody. So I am free to just be.
Wow.
Hello, Stefano.
Hello, Iulia. That's something special. And before we talk about it in a lot more detail, which I would love to, a little note to anybody who is listening for the first time or anybody who has listened before but forgotten. My name is Stefano. I run Puck Creations and I'm the regular host of this podcast. If the title Storytelling with Puck hasn't given it away, this podcast is all about stories. We will share stories, chat about stories, and see how stories fit in with the business world too. But of course, we couldn't do any of this without our wonderful guests. So you've just heard us. The story, as all of her stories are, was amazing. So let us introduce Iulia Farcas. Iulia, I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe while you're doing that, tell us a little bit more about that poetic prose / story that you just read. It was beautiful.
Thank you very much, Stefano, first of all, for having me on your great podcast. Well, what can I say about myself? I have been living in a world of stories ever since I was about 4 years old. That's when I first had my vivid memory of me listening to my grandmother telling me the story of Humpty Dumpty, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with it,
Yes,
but
very
it's a
much so,
great
yeah.
story. Well, actually, it's a nursery rhyme, but it's a story behind that. Of course, I didn't get the meaning of it until years later, but
Yeah.
still, it was a great beginning. Um, and my mother and my grandmother actually started telling me stories in English. I am Romanian, so your listeners can know more about me. And they started telling me stories in English because they lived abroad many years, and English was part of their growing up, their life. So they started telling me stories in English, and it was a beautiful moment. And well, professionally speaking, I can say that I have been wearing many hats and telling many stories for the past 15 years now or so. I've always liked learning and doing new things. So I did not want to choose only one thing to focus on, to pursue,
Okay.
because I always wanted to explore and expand. So this is why I started working in multinational companies, in big, large companies in the corporate world. And easily I made the transition to being a freelancer right now, or working, with a smaller company.
Mhm.
So I started in the advisory field, the consultancy field, then moved on to communication and marketing. So I basically have been telling stories about ideas, about projects, about brands, about services and products, and about people, because people are at the root of everything.
Indeed, yeah. The people are indeed at the root of everything. Without people, there would be no business. Well, there might still be ideas, I guess, but they wouldn't be able to be expressed between each other. Um, uh, I read something actually on your LinkedIn profile where you talk about finding your gift and giving it away. And you think that that's very intrinsically linked with the meaning and purpose of life. It resonated with me, and I wondered how, as you were reading your story just then, and as you were kind of telling me a little bit more about yourself, how that idea and stories are intertwined, and maybe you could kind of elaborate a bit more as well on the idea, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I believe that everyone needs to find their own personal story, but their true personal story. I mean, your personal story is meant to connect you more to who you are and help you shed a little bit more of what you are not. And I believe in living in my own terms, on my own terms. And I believe in making the most of every opportunity. But as we all know, opportunities need to be created. They don't just present themselves. So this is where telling a story, a real story, a true story, maybe sometimes a raw story about yourself, helps you connect to others, because as we said in the beginning, people are at the root of everything.
Uh-huh.
And of course, words are at the root of everything, because we connect to each other mostly with words. There is said at the beginning there was the word.
Yeah.
Of course, we find different types of ways to communicate with each other, by sound, by video, or by seeing something. But intrinsically, we have words to express ourselves. And words are at the root of every story.
That's true.
And finding your gift and giving it away. You find your gift by shaping and transforming each day your story to fit your life and to connect to others.
Again, that very much resonates, and as you talk about the idea of your story and developing your gift, from when you first, I guess, realize what it is that you are able to do, and we all have very different skill sets and different ways of expressing ourselves, and some people struggle sometimes to express themselves in the way that that everyone else expresses themselves, and they can't necessarily easily have a conversation, but they can express themselves maybe through music or through some kind of art or something else that I guess tells their story. And what I love about that is you mentioned words earlier, and especially for me and for you, both people who love that kind of communication and love writing. Words are so powerful. Yeah, I find it really interesting that when people struggle to express themselves through words, they can still tell stories. They're still able to compose a piece of music on the piano, draw something that has 1,000 words inside of it, and then I think that comes often down to perspective and how we then listen to those words, how we acknowledge a particular piece of music or a particular painting, and what we then think they are trying to express. And I think sometimes it's easier to talk about that when it comes to art and music, that we don't fully, I guess, understand what the other party is saying. But then when we come back to words, sometimes we think we know exactly the meaning of what someone is trying to say. Yet actually, it's just as hard sometimes to understand what people are trying to say when they're expressing themselves through stories. But the important thing is we don't always need to. We don't need to understand every word and every single part of the meaning they're trying to express. It just needs to mean something to us. So that's how I see it. I don't know if you have a similar view on that or something completely different. And do you think I'm talking nonsense?
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, you mentioned art, you mentioned painting, you mentioned music. Yes, that's true. But you need to understand that everything gets filtered through our eyes and through our beliefs, through the way we see the world. So yes, of course, two people can look at a painting and see totally different things. And I totally agree about the stories that you can tell by writing a poem, by composing a piece of music. And it all comes down to the picture that you can somehow instill in a person's mind. I mean, you look at something, you can understand it and see a picture in your mind's eye, and try to figure out, okay, what did the poet, did the author want to convey? What message do they want to share with the world? I also dabbled a bit in making art, in painting, and I always like to put symbols in my work. And also when I write, I try to write it in a way that if, as I mentioned before, if two people read something that I write, they automatically will have different views, and they will be triggered in different ways to see something, because you cannot, your message does not resonate with everyone, or it does not resonate in the same way with everyone. So everyone gets to choose what they resonate with. And this is why I like symbols, but many times I struggled with getting my point across, and with the fact that, okay, people maybe they will not see what I want to transmit to, to send them. So yeah, it's a work in progress always.
It is. And I think that's, it's one of the hardest parts of business communication, actually. When we talk about stories and the way we tell our stories and the way we express ourselves through things like, and I want to come back to this later actually, because you do it so beautifully in some of yours, but through things like metaphors and poetic license, and analogies, and allowing ourselves to write about one world but actually be talking about a completely different world. That's really powerful, and as we've just mentioned, it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. But when it comes to stories for business and to communicating through business, actually what we need to try and do to the best of our ability, and this is never going to work out 100%, because as we've already mentioned, everyone has their own perceptions. But what we need to try and do is to communicate a clear and a consistent message. And that then comes down to understanding to the best of your ability who your audience are, what their behaviors are, what their mindset is, how they work, how they understand things. Are they on a similar page to you, to the way that they think about things? If you can do that, and if you can do that well, then when you are then coming back to telling stories to express a meaning, you at least have some idea that the chances are they still might not understand exactly the words that you are trying to portray, but the underlying message and the core values and the core ideas that you're trying to bring through, hopefully they will be on the same page, and hopefully they will then want to work with you in the future because they have built a trust and a rapport through the stories that you're telling.
You actually anticipated what I wanted to say in this regard.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's perfect. Actually, when you sell something, be it an idea, be it a project, a product, a service, you need to know your target audience. You need to know your client's story, what drives their behavior, what challenges them, what triggers them, what their values are, what goals they have. Because basically, when you sell something, you sell to a human being. You have your buyer persona that you need to define, and you need to define their story, of course, in order to be able to sell them, to give them what they want, because it's always a win-win situation. I mean, you as a company or as I don't know, as an entrepreneur, as a freelancer, you have something that you want to share with the world, and you want the world to benefit from what you have to offer them. So, of course, and the other person, the one that you are selling to, the one that you are, your target audience, they want something to, I don't know, fix something to help them with solve an issue. It's a win-win situation. And you need to keep in mind that the buyer persona is a living, breathing human being with a story. And always when you sell an idea, a service, a product, you even sell yourself as a professional, as an entrepreneur, as a, I don't know, as a family person. You need to first sell yourself on the story that you are selling to others. So, coming back to what you said, you need to have a clear message and a consistent way in which you deliver that message to the world.
I very much agree with that. And what interests me, and I'd like to ask, is when you are working with clients, what is it they hire you to do? And how do you go about helping them to express themselves and to connect in the way that we've just been talking about?
Well, you will never outperform your own self-belief.
Okay.
So everything starts from what you believe about yourself. What is the story that you tell yourself? The story through which you see the world, the story that you tell others. So it's everything down to what you believe. And it's about shaping and transforming that story in a way that communicates who you really are, what you stand for, what you want to achieve, and how you want to go about achieving that. I mean, I am fascinated by the way the human mind works.
Yes, I think lots of us are. I'm definitely definitely in agreement. But please continue.
And I'm also fascinated about psychology and words. The words that make up the stories that you tell yourself. And actually, my purpose right now is to inspire and to guide people to choose the right story for themselves.
Okay.
One that points them in the direction they desire, one they can openly and sincerely embrace, and they can see it in their mind's eye.
Okay.
I mean, as I said, your beliefs reflect the way you view yourself and the way you view the world and the way you experience your reality. And your story frames that view.
So from that basis, I'm interested then a little in the types of clients that you are working with, the types of people that come to you for that support to, I guess, gain that inner belief in the first place, and then to be able to express themselves. Who are they usually? What type of people are you talking to?
Well, I always like to say that they are the type of people that I used to be about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
before I embarked on this journey of self-knowing, the journey of finding my identity, because I think we all have, a couple of moments where we tend to lose our way because life happens, and sometimes we think that life happens to us instead of life happening for us. And this is why it's important to know your story and to shape it the way that you want to shape it, not the way that others tell you to. So people that come to me are people that want to discover themselves, that want to have more for themselves, and want to be able to express themselves the way they want. As I said, not the way that other people tell them to express themselves.
Mhm.
And people that want to outperform their self-beliefs and be more aware of the things they tell themselves and of the things they can do in order to have a clearer vision of who they are and what they want in life.
Makes sense. You mentioned something there about things happening to us, or things that we make happen. That kind of idea, and it actually reminded me a little of one of the stories that you wrote for Storytelling with Puck, which is On the Outside Looking In. I can't remember the exact title, but you know the one I'm talking about. I'm going to put you on the spot slightly here. Do you by chance have that story anywhere near you? Would it be possible to?
I think I would need to go look for it. Oh, it's okay. It's actually called Looking In and Out, and
That's it.
it
Yes.
has two parts to it. Because, as I said, I am fascinated about. I have a fascination for people and for for seeing what they sometimes don't want to show.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting concept of trying to observe them, of course, without stepping over some toes or something. So I found it.
Brilliant. Thank you. I will. I will stay quiet and listen humbly. I love this story, and I'm sure that all of our listeners will too.
Okay, so this is part one of Looking In and Out. There is a house I walk by from time to time. It's in the neighborhood I grew up in. It has been fascinating to me ever since I was a child. There is something about the way it stands tall behind the white fence and the massive gate. It's an old one-story Greek revival style house with columns and huge windows. The ground floor opens with a terrace guarded by beautifully crafted columns that lead to the front yard. The columns reach all the way to the first floor, where they carefully shield a generous exterior balcony and the facade with high windows. I walked by it again last night, without even realizing it. I approached the massive gate and found myself on the outside looking in. Everything seemed perfect and undisturbed. The heavy walls, the lace sculpted on the columns, and the yard with flawlessly cut decorative trees. I saw a warm light coming from the large window downstairs, like a beacon in the dead of night. As I caught a glimpse of the inside, my heart started to race. I saw a man in his late 50s sitting behind a huge mahogany desk. He was writing something. He had a whiskey glass resting patiently in front of him. From time to time, he was interrupting his writing to take short sips from his glass while looking out the window. At one point, As he was gazing out the window, a shadow fell upon his face. That's when I saw it. A mixture of anger, sadness, and worry. I was mesmerized by the scene, and all sorts of scenarios rushed through my mind at that point. As he slowly took another sip from his glass, our eyes met for a brief time. He didn't seem to mind me looking at him. After all, he was on the inside looking out.
I love that. And it's interesting because I've heard it before. I read it when you first posted it, and I actually read it aloud on one of the evenings of stories that we had. Not anywhere near as well as you just read it, I have to say. And it's interesting how it evolves also in my mind. So each time I hear it, something different comes through, especially after hearing you talk about the different perspectives and the ideas that of the stories that we tell ourselves and our personal story, and then suddenly that resonates in a different way too, and you can almost see the idea of you looking in at this man writing and having his sips of whiskey and telling yourself a story about him, whereas he's already telling himself his own story over and over and over again, possibly even writing down his own story. He looks out, he sees you from the inside looking out, and he maybe has a story about you. But at that point in time, the focus of the piece that you've written is about him. So the interest layer is in his mind, and he's on the inside looking out. So it's all about him. There's so much to it, and there's so much depth. And what I loved as well, and I think that this then comes back to business also and how we communicate in business often, is the way that you describe the scene with so much detail that I was there walking with you. I was there looking in with you at every moment. And when we talked about earlier, the idea of using metaphors and the idea of using poetic license, but also the idea of being descriptive enough so that people can go with you when you're writing that and they're reading that or they're listening to that. I think that is really powerful, not just in personal stories, but also in business stories. And I think that's something you did spectacularly well with that. So I really loved it.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. It's telling a good story means that the people that are the people that are listening to it, they can picture themselves in that story with you. Yeah. Exactly what you said. They are walking with you through everything, through all the details, and they can vividly picture it in their mind's eye. They can see it in their mind's eye. Of course, everyone will add a bit of something, a bit of, I don't know, a different color, some notion, because as I said earlier, we all filter everything through our own way of being. So for you mentioned the business side, the professional side. Of course, any brand that communicates a story, they need to be able to take their, the buyer persona, their target audience. They need to take them with them and make them part of the story. Yes. I mean, okay, as we say, in every story, there's the villain, there's the hero, and there's the problem that needs to be solved. And yes, people probably want to see themselves as heroes of the story, and the brand can, communicate that to the people and involve them in the journey. You need to take your target audience on a journey with you.
I agree with that. And what you talked about heroes and villains, and what I really like about the concept of relatability and the concept of bringing people with you and bringing people on your, as you say, on your journey, is that actually quite often they don't necessarily need to be picturing themselves all the time when they're looking at your brand as the hero. What they do need is they need to feel something that you felt. They need to connect with you in a way that is slightly deeper than you spouting a whole load of facts and benefits about your products, and what X can do for them and what Y can do for them. And the reason I mention this specifically is to kind of, I'm purposely doing this. I'm purposely going from business to personal with stories, because they can seem like separate things, but they're not. The key underlying factor with stories is that they connect you and that they make you feel. If as a brand and as a business, you can make your audience feel, it doesn't mean they always have to feel even happy. They can feel the same anger that you feel towards a problem. They can feel the joy of overcoming that problem. They can feel sad about how things are going on in the world around them, maybe even within your own company, because you don't have the funds to do everything you want to do to make it work, or whatever it is that's causing a problem. But the idea is that when you tell stories, you're able to generate feelings. Now, you might tell stories about things that have never happened and probably will never happen to your audience, but that doesn't actually matter. What matters is that they have felt the same feelings on the occasions of whatever it is that happened to you happened. And they've had those feelings and they want to overcome those feelings. And then how that then links back to the personal is, and sorry, I know this is a very deep story for you, so we don't have to talk in too much detail about it, but one of the stories you wrote for Storytelling with Puck was My 9/11, which people would have read in a billion different ways, and people would have taken in a billion different ways in terms of what the actual facts of the story meant, both to them and what they maybe thought it meant to you. If you wouldn't mind, I know you probably don't have the story in front of you, but do you mind talking about this? I know it's quite a deep.
Well, I can also read the story because I have access to it now.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
But I want to come back to what you said earlier, and about the thing that the fact that you need to instill and wake up some sort of emotion in your audience. That is very important. But about this, one of the mistakes that sometimes brands make, or you as an entrepreneur makes, is the fact that you try to convey one message and share one story and believe that everyone will resonate automatically with that story.
Yeah.
And it's not true, because not all of them had similar experiences, or maybe not all of them want the same things, not all of them have the same values. So you need to keep that in mind when you shape that message, when you come up with what you want to tell the world. And okay, I'll get through. Or if you want to say something, sure.
No, I was just going to say it's a good point. I think there is, again, you have, as a brand, if you've defined your brand well, there should be a core set of values underneath your brand which hold your brand up, and they're things that are really, really important to you. Be important, if you've done it well, to your audience too. There will also be, your purpose, and there will be the strategy behind what you do, and there's lots of different factors that go into building up the core of your brand. But the idea, as you say, that one particular story resonates with every single different potential buyer, or even because your audience is much wider than your buyer, we won't go into that right now, but even to the other people that you're speaking to, as you say, it doesn't work like that. And so sometimes you need to tell different stories from different angles. Now, you don't want to compromise your brand whilst you're doing that. You want to make sure that your values are still underpinning everything. And often, as we were coming back to, that all comes down to feelings and our interpretation of stories, which is why I feel like your 9/11 story means so much and works on so many different levels. But obviously, it's also very, very personal to you. So yes, if you would like to read it, that would be absolutely amazing. I think our listeners would love to hear it.
Yes, sure. So, my 9/11. My memories are a blur. I can't make out his face quite clearly when I think of him. Thank God for the photos, although sometimes looking at them hurts because they portray good times, happy times, together times. That day still stays with me. It's fresh in my mind. The small TV that we set up in his room was turned on the news. A horrific act of violence that would end up shaking the entire world was unfolding before his very eyes. He used to travel a lot for work in the good old days when he was healthy. And that city, which was now covered in dust and terror, used to be one of his beloved destinations. I saw tears in his eyes. His feeble body was already aching, and now his heart too. There were times I wanted to just run away, not be there anymore. That was one of those moments. I couldn't stand seeing the shadow of the man I adored, looked up to, and sought affection from. I hurried to school trying to put behind me what I had just witnessed. He died 4 months later. I didn't get the chance to say I love you. I used to unconsciously say to him every time I looked for him in other men. Now I consciously say to him every time I choose to be and love myself.
Thank you very much for reading that. I think I've asked you about this before, and I'll maybe put a clip out there for people at some point so that they can understand what that was about for you. But I think this time, if you don't mind, actually, what we'll do is we'll leave that in people's minds so that they can see what it means to them, and take on their own perspective as the story was originally written and meant to be.
Yeah.
And on that note, if you don't mind, I think it's now maybe a good time to say thank you so much for joining me and for joining Puck Creations in the Storytelling with Puck podcast. I can't speak. What's my company name? It has been genuinely wonderful, so thought-provoking. A mixture of different emotions, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing when we're telling stories. And I've loved every moment. So thank you so much for joining. If you would, let everybody know how and where they can find you, because people are going to want to find you. I know that for sure. That would be amazing. And then once you're done, I will finish with one of our stories, as is the tradition on the Storytelling with Puck podcast.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for having me, for inviting me on your great podcast. It was a great experience for me. And I enjoyed very much our conversation that went from professional to personal. And yes, we went through all sorts of emotions because, yes, this is what stories are for. They need to make us feel something. In a world where, I don't know, when sometimes we are numb, especially taking into account the previous year that we had, that many of us were left, I don't know, wanting more or confused, and many of them were actually numb and frozen in time. So yes, it's important to have a story, but have a real story, a story that we can share openly and consciously with the world. And yes, people can find me first on LinkedIn. I don't actually have a website set up yet, so that's a project in the making, So they
Maybe
can
tell everyone how they can spell your name, by the way, because if I had heard Iulia Farcas, I may not have spelt it the way it spells.
Well, Iulia is Iulia, and Farcas, it's actually called Farcas.
Ah, okay. It's Farcas. There you go, Farcas. Thank you.
That's spelled Farcas.
Brilliant, brilliant. So they can find you on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else they can find you, or is LinkedIn your main home for connecting with people?
Well, right now it's my main home. I also have a Facebook, a page,
Okay.
but it's not all done yet, and it's mainly in Romanian. So some of the English speakers will have a bit of a trouble understanding.
But if we have any Romanians listening, or people who for some reason speak Romanian, even if you're not Romanian, then please do visit Iulia's Facebook page as well. Iulia, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Before you all leave us, it's time for what has now become a traditional ending and a story from Puck Creations. Roland tripped over Jerome's size 13s as he turned onto the second flight of stairs. Hearing a crunch, Jerome peeked out of a narrow gap in the corner of his retreating eyes to see a flustered but still cool face of the man he had long admired from afar. Nobody said a word as Roland steadily rose back to his feet, tied the second button of his jacket, and gave Jerome a knowing look. Jerome took this as his signal to stand up too. They climbed to the third floor together. Jerome smiled apologetically as he made his way to the lift. Sat this time on the third floor the following day, Jerome tucked in his feet so Roland could pass by. Roland's smile was even bigger this time, and his narrow eyes extenuated the kindness in his smile. He offered a hand, which Jerome held on to for a second longer than he had meant, before they climbed to the fourth floor. Still slightly red-faced, Jerome found his way to the lift in order to start his working day. It had been 2 weeks, but this time Jerome made it all the way to the 11th floor. As Roland reached the bottom of the stairs, he laughed and roared, "This is me!" as he pointed to the accompanying officers. "It took me 2 months to get to where you are now." A tear trickled down Jerome's face as he moved towards Roland's embrace. Words had not been necessary from an unknown friend. He climbed to the 12th and final floor, knowing. You've just been listening to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be back very soon, so make sure you subscribe and catch up on any of the episodes you've missed.